In October 2013, the Obama administration faced a very large domestic crisis. Healthcare.gov, the portal the nation was supposed to use to sign up for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, was in shambles. It was several months late and more than 300% over budget. It looked and worked or didn't work like the internet of 1996. And the consultants and experts who had built it for the government were warning that it would take millions more and more weeks, if not months, to fix. And then something quite amazing happened. Largely due to the creativity of the president himself, an entrepreneurial team of young engineers and project managers from Silicon Valley came to the rescue. Working day and night from a hacked-together headquarters in Maryland, they completely rebuilt healthcare.gov in a few short weeks. The total cost was the single-digit millions. And the new site, version 2.0, was a complete success. 18 million Americans have signed up for healthcare because of it. From that startup-like environment has emerged two remarkable digital efforts within government, what President Obama now calls the 21st century equivalent of the Peace Corps. One is the U.S. Digital Service. The other is an organization called 18F. And together they are calling young digital professionals to Washington and to other places around the country to lift the 20th century government bureaucracy and its technology into the digital century. The effort is quietly taking the government by storm. And the agencies who've experienced it now say they will never go back to the old way of doing things. Tonight we have three founders of USDS and 18F with us, along with the U.S. Digital Services Officer assigned to the Department of Education. We're going to explore with them this quiet revolution from its roots in the dark days of healthcare.gov 1.0 to the bipartisan victories it is now winning in Washington today. Please join me in welcoming Mikey Dickerson, Hillary Hartley, Haley Van Dyke, and Lisa Galopter.
Thanks.
Hi. This is the most unique panel that we've had tonight for a number of reasons, and we're really glad to have you here. I'll tell you what, rather than my trying to introduce what each of you does and what you are doing now, why don't you just introduce yourselves briefly, and I'd also like you to add what it was you were doing just before you started doing what you're doing now. Mikey, let's start with you.
Sure. I am Mikey Dickerson. Right now, I'm the administrator, as they call it, of the U.S. Digital Service. That is a government word that means manager. And right before I got there to do this, well, if you count this as the healthcare.gov story you were talking about a second ago, then right before that, I was here working just across the street in CL4 at Google. I was a site reliability engineering manager there.
Hillary.
Sure. Hi, I'm Hillary Hartley. I came to the federal government through the Presidential Innovation Fellowship. And at the end of my fellowship, we launched 18F. There's a much more dramatic story there. But I've actually been working with government for, about 20 years, which is crazy to me. But it was always sort of from the outside. And so when I found out about the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, it felt like the right time, both in my career and also in sort of where I saw government going and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to have an effect on the services that all of you use, in your daily lives. The fellowship felt like the right fit for me. So I came to government for a short stint and have been there ever since.
A short stint.
It was supposed to be 6 months.
Yeah.
Didn't go home after 6 months.
Lisa.
I am Lisa Galopter. Hello. Good evening. I am the Chief Digital Services Officer at the U.S. Department of Education. I have been in government a whopping 8 months now. My first day was April 6th. Before that, I have done zero civic stuff. Actually, right before this, I was running digital for BET, Black Entertainment Television Network, a Viacom network.
Great, thanks. Haley.
Hi, my name is Haley Van Dyke. I am the Deputy Administrator, as number 2 to Mikey at USDS. And before USDS, I was breaking a few bones trying to get USDS set up and created.
That's great, thanks. What is the problem?
Who's going to take that one?
I'm hoping somebody else will jump on that one.
The problem is so multifaceted, it's really actually hard to start describing. But as succinctly as possible, the biggest issue is that the private sector over the last 2 decades has spent an incredible amount of time and energy improving itself and getting really, really great at building digital services that delight citizens and people across the world. So all sorts of innovations that we don't think of as innovations anymore have taken place in the last few decades. Agile, user-centered design, cloud, all sorts of things. And the biggest problem is that all of those gigantic transitions have completely skipped over government. And government is still sitting back in the early 90s, back with all of these fallacies where cloud is illegal, where what actual users need are dropped from everything from how we build digital services to how we actually write and think about policy. And that is as succinctly as possible the biggest issue. But there's another side of the problem inside government, which is the government is really good at persisting, and it's gotten incredibly good at developing processes that maintain the status quo, to the incredible detriment of government. There is such a pervasive concern and kind of failure, or concern of failure, essentially, that it has created this downward spiral where the status quo has become the riskiest option, and government has a really hard time breaking itself out of those molds. So what we're trying to do is come in and break that cycle and actually bring in the private sector best practices that are very, very normal to every single person in this room and transplant those into government where they are much less normal and very radical, to be quite honest, and actually try and shift raise the bar and shift what the status quo is today.
No, it would be really easy for us looking from the outside in to say, well, that's just so typical. I mean, this is the federal government, dug in, kind of ossified, status quo. It would be a very simplistic way of looking at this. But what you guys have found in actually digging in and working in these agencies is it's a lot more both subtle and complex than just simply the simplistic view that we might have is. Can you talk a little bit more about both of those things?
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about 2012, the group of people that started the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, because it really was the MVP of this movement in terms of saying we know that there are amazing, brilliant people inside the agencies who live and breathe their job and live and breathe, this idea that all they want to do is do their job, but is helping government be better. For whatever reason, many of them are stuck against walls, or they don't have the in-house talent to get it done. And they've tried to procure things, and maybe that's gone awry. And so Todd Park and other folks that sort of saw this need and said, let's see if we can entice people from the tech sector, people from industry, to come in for short, quote-unquote tours of duty. 6 to 12 months. Let's just start there and see if we can attract this new type of technologist that has sort of, as Todd likes to say, hearts the size of Jupiter, that really just are very mission and impact oriented. Get them into the government, get them partnering with these people who really have amazing ideas, who are just stuck for one reason or another. Get them partnered and see what they can do, see if they can ship. And it worked. And I think that's really what we're all building on today is, yes, you can take a survey and you can say, that is blowing up and that is blowing up and we need to help out here. But at the end of the day, there are people on the ground trying their hardest to get that done and are stuck for whatever reason.
And I would just add on to that, kind of as somebody who's actually partnered with an agency and embedded within an agency, that is 100% true. And they are welcoming this change, and they are embracing the change, and they're asking for more change, right? Somebody said to me when I came, they were like, we thought you'd be wearing a cape. Like they're really, they're inviting us into doing more than just software, but to actually talk about how to change, how to make culture change, how to make culture shift, how to start thinking about using those methodologies that we do for software development, things like user-centered design and human-centered design thinking about how to put the customer first and foremost, and how do you actually take that and extend it beyond tech? How do you take it and extend it into policy making and into basically what we call user-centered government? And so they've been really, the agencies kind of are, any tool in their arsenal that they can add to actually fix stuff and make stuff better day in and day out, they're all about it.
The name Todd Park has come up, and I just want to say for those of you who don't know, Todd was one of the leaders who created the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, and is a former CTO of the government, one of the co-founders and real drivers behind the U.S. Digital Service, and he's sitting right over there.
Todd?
So, hi, Todd.
You can probably stand up.
A shout out,
Good luck with
a shout out for Todd, and there's a whole team of people sitting over there just waiting to recruit at the end of the night. So if you're interested, make a beeline to those first 2 rows over there and talk to them. All right, so you've talked about what the vision is, and you've defined the problem a bit, and Lisa, you've talked about how it's taking shape. But Mikey, now I'm going to roll the clock back a little bit to healthcare.gov. These things weren't clearly they weren't happening, the vision for today, and in fact maybe the things that are most representative of the problem were really on display. Talk a little bit about what you encountered when you guys came in to try to clean this up.
Sure. This is a little bit of like reliving the trauma of the past. So my answer to that has changed over the last year and a half. So I know some of you have heard me talk about this before. There are many layers to what was going on there. And at the surface, if you just walk in as an engineer and walk in and look at a bunch of other engineers and see what they're doing and how they're doing it, and it was just total insanity. Like when you first looked, there were 55 different companies contracted to work on different parts of healthcare.gov. Which is a fairly complicated operation, but it ain't that complicated. And there were, I don't know, conservatively, this is another piece of insanity, literally nobody knows how many people were engineers, developers, whatever you want to call them, technical roles on the project, but it was at least hundreds. They were in dozens of different buildings. And not only did they not have any kind of habit or custom of working together, they were in most cases explicitly forbidden from communicating with each other because of the way contracts are managed through the government. So this was set up, and there was nobody. The government reserved for itself the job of coordinating how all this was going to go, and the problem was the government doesn't really have that skill set, and I'll just leave that where that is. I could elaborate on that, but the government just wasn't really equipped to do that job, and so what was going on just made zero sense. And so a lot of the things that we did that helped, like a lot of the stuff we did that was like the battlefield medicine that helped a lot in a very short period of time, was stuff that seems silly to even explain now, such as having all those people meet together, like sometimes, like in a place. Like that. And then you mentioned in your introduction the makeshift headquarters up in Maryland. Yeah, there's an operations center. It's still there. It's still going full blast around the clock. We still have people there, in fact, although I'm not sure they're there exactly tonight because it's not a high volume night on Thursdays. But it's still there. So that was the thing. And like installing monitoring, that was a thing that had not been done. So without that, like these hundreds of people who are responsible for little teeny pieces that all have to all collaborate together to make the distributed system work, literally didn't know whether the site was up or not other than by CNN. That's exactly what our monitoring was for the first 3-4 weeks or so.
Now you mentioned your view had changed.
Yes.
That it used to be one thing and it's now another. What's changed?
Well, so all that stuff I said is still true, and you'll still find behavior like that when you walk in and look at a project that's not going super well. It's just that if you want to know why it got to that point, you start asking those questions, you start peeling back the layers. There's a lot more to it, and it goes to what you said a second ago, like a very simplistic, like 2-sentence explanation would be the government is stuck in the past, and that we use that as shorthand and we say that, and it's true enough. It's harder to figure out than that, though. The government is not actually stuck. It does change. It moves forward for whatever forward happens to mean at the time. It just does that at a pace which is a lot slower, right? And it was designed to be this way. That's what's so hard about it. How many people, forget people in a job like ours, like politicians run for office and say that what their vision is to make government run more like a business, more efficient, faster, and make decisions quicker and stuff like that. We actually don't want the government to do that for the most part. We don't want Social Security to radically change behavior between this year and next year. That would be not popular. That would be not good. People are depending on those benefits to live out the rest of their lives on, and that's not a business that you really want disrupted.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. The government was designed with the value, it's written into the Constitution, that everybody will get equal protection under the law. That's another constraint that businesses don't operate with. Like, nobody is building, like, take whatever tech company you want. Just look at any restaurant on Castro over there. Pick any of them. Every single one of them has put some thought into who is their target market. And their target market is not the whole entire United States of America. And like everything from the decorations on the walls to like the opening hours to the prices have all been chosen targeting a customer, not the whole entire country at once.
You know, it's funny.
The government's trying to serve the whole entire country at once.
You should say that, but one of you, it may have been you, Mikey, but one of you I know used the term planet-scale websites. That's what are now required. You referred, Haley, in your opening to we all use websites every day that are accustomed to do these things that Mikey's talking about, and yet the government has not been ready to do that and is only just now getting outfitted to do it. Why has it taken so long? Does anybody want to talk about, you know, we're 20 years into the World Wide Web, and probably way longer, not as long, but 15 good solid years into planet scale e-commerce. Does it have to do with the way it's structured? There's no one decision maker. There's no one sort of been the quarterback until the president who said, yeah, we're going to do this. What would be your theories about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think one large one is how we actually buy and procure services. And unfortunately, as I kind of alluded to earlier, government is so simply a waterfall shop through and through. Everything we do is through very, very long, slow processes, particularly in procurement. And that's, I think, where you see the starkest difference between how the private sector operates and how government does today and what we're kind of trying to shift and change. We still buy software the same way that we buy battleships, which is through 5-year-long requirements, gathering phases before we ever build any sort of or start coding anything. And usually it's another 5 years after that before we push anything to production and actually let real users touch it. And that just simply doesn't work anymore, as everybody here in this room knows. And so I think that's at the very, but those processes are propped up through a very intricate, well-intended set of rules and regulations, which Mikey was alluding to, are well-intended and there for a lot of very great purposes, but are kind of clashing as we start looking at modernizing digital services in a way that are able to move quickly and adjust to planetary-sized services that quite frankly, even for the private sector, weren't a thing 15 years ago. We kind of forget that some of these innovations have happened rather fast. And government isn't designed to move that quickly, and so how do we kind of combine these two, which is actually the procurement space is some of the things that 18F has been doing some really, really fantastic work in. I don't know if Hillary wants to talk about the Agile BPA, which is an incredibly new, innovative way of looking at buying services from the private sector, which we're excited about.
Yeah,
Go for it.
Absolutely. So one of the things that came out of the Innovation Fellowship was something called RFP Easy, so a request for proposal, and really trying to disrupt how those get done. They can often be 300 pages, maybe even 1,000 pages long, and as Haley alluded to, it's often, we're going to gather all the requirements, and you're going to bid on this, and you're going to come back to us in 2 years and deliver the thing. So from, built into our DNA was really trying to think of new ways to get procurement, the way government buys things, and specifically in our case, software done. So one of the experiments, we're running 2 big experiments right now. One is kind of this notion of marketplaces. And just to back up very quickly, 18F sort of resides in this whole ecosystem, the digital coalition, as you saw referred to in the picture that John showed. And so 18F is a consultancy inside the federal government for the federal government. So we're a team of product people and consultants that work with agencies to make essentially a build or a buy decision. Is 18F going to build a product for you, or are we going to help you figure out, what it is you need, how you're going to get it, who's going to build it for you? So kind of with that context, one of our lines of business is sort of around acquisition services, and our two big experiments are one, a concept of marketplaces. So one thing that we built is called the Agile BPA, a blanket purchase agreement, which is essentially a government vehicle for vendors and companies to get into a pool that has been sort of pre-vetted and pre-cleared and can do business with the government very, very easily. The concept of the BPA in and of itself wasn't, is not terribly radical, but how we got vendors into it was, I'll say it shook things up a little bit. What we did was, instead of having you, give us a 300-page RFP, we actually said, okay, to compete for this and to get in this pool, here is an API, an application programming interface, a set of data. Here's a set of data. Here's an API. Here's the problem statement. Build us an app. We want to see how you do it. We want to understand that you understand what we mean by agile, by iterative development, by user-centered design, doing some user research. And all of your code is going to be open source. We want to be able to see it, and we want to be able to judge it. And so we gave them 2 weeks to build something. And at the end of that, we picked, I believe it was about 17 companies that are now in this pool of pre-cleared vendors that operate like all of us do, operate like our teams do, that use agile, lean, iterative methodologies that have this laser focus on the user.
Did anyone look at you and say, 2 weeks? Are you kidding me? 2 weeks?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the point. I mean,
right.
There's this concept in our world in software development of an MVP, the minimum viable product.
Right.
So that's all we wanted. It could be a prototype, it could be a pretty prototype, but we just wanted to see essentially that you could build something, that you could connect the data, and that you could have some output, and that you understood all the ways that we work. Some of the results surprised us in terms of there was one story.
In which way? Let's go ahead and tell the story.
Well, there's one story, and I will not say the name of the company, but they actually sent us an email during the question phase. We did all the sort of typical phases of this procurement, and during the question and answer phase, they sent us an email essentially asking for the data on a CD. On a disk, because they didn't understand the requirement. They didn't fundamentally understand that there is this open data. It's on the internet. There's an API, and you need to work with that.
What's an API?
Yeah.
What's an API? Exactly. So there were some surprising moments, but by far, we now have 17 really awesome teams that we can our inboxes, our intake is exploding. We only say yes to about 10% of the projects that come to us for various reasons, but the main reason is because we simply don't have the people to do it. So this BPA is going to allow us to scale in a way and to partner with the business community in a way that is it's going to be revolutionary for how software gets built, and for again, like Haley said, really raising the bar, setting that new standard, and then having this business community come along with us to really spread that out through all of their government contracts.
When we were there, I think I heard that phrase more than any other, and it really stuck with me, which was modern software techniques. Mm-hmm. I asked people again and again, what are you doing? And that phrase was, we're using modern software techniques. Is that essentially what you're talking about?
Essentially, yes.
It's a business practice, and it's the way you develop the software. But let's one more process question, then I want to dive into some real stories about things that you've been doing and are working.
Things that are opportunities.
Explain. Yes, you reading my notes? I'm going to have to hide them. Someone explain the difference and the relationship between USDS and 18F.
Yeah. So to start, I think when we look at government overall, it's really important to, from the outside, it can feel like this monolithic single institution. And it's really important to recognize that it's much less like a single company and more like an entire industry that needs disruption. And in order to do that, we came up with a very interesting kind of 3-layer technique of how we can actually insert disruptor agents at each level to help catalyze that change. So the 3 layers of it, real quickly, are the first is the United States Digital Service that Mikey and I work at. And we deploy teams into agencies, the most talented people we can possibly find, to go work on the most mission-critical, important services at agencies across government. The second layer is also part of the United States Digital Service, but we feel one of the most important things for institutionalizing this is to disguise these teams, put them in camouflage, and actually embed them into the agencies so they become part of their host environment. And they can actually start working on that transformation and culture change from the inside. And those are United States Digital Service teams at various agencies. Lisa runs that one at the Department of Education. And then the third layer is 18F, which has an incredible superpower that the first 2 layers don't have, which is they can operate and function like a business. They have this incredible model where they actually are fee for service. So their clients are paying. So any agency that wants to work with them and can pay them can. And this brings in a huge opportunity to scale in a way that we can. And so these 2 work really, really well together in terms of, kind of top down, being able to drop into where the highest need is, whether we're invited or not, candidly. And 18F can kind of work from the bottom up and help scale a lot of the common services and function as a consultancy for other agencies.
Yeah, the business models are different.
Yeah.
And like Haley explains better than I do, you need both of them. They both are going to provide, they're both a critical piece of the solution. Being cost reimbursed in 18F, and this is the way GSA, General Services Administration, is the home agency for 18F, and it is the agency whose purpose is to provide cost reimbursed services to all the rest of the government. That means that they are not bound by a congressional appropriation and how big they can scale up to. They're in a better position to build things that are going to build a product, say, as a shared service and maintain it for a long time. That's a thing that really doesn't make any sense to do out of the White House the way we do. And it has one disadvantage, which is that it's like vampire rules where you have to be invited and you have to do an agreement before you can go in to a place that might need your help. And we have, from the White House, we are limited to the size we can grow to how much money Congress wants to appropriate for us, which means we'll only ever do a fairly small number of things. We're not set up in a way to build and sustain something for decades. We can certainly take on stuff on the scale of months or a few years. We're well positioned for that. And we have kind of Kool-Aid Man rules where you can just go through the wall if it's...
And Hillary, why is it called 18F?
It's our little homage to 30 Rock. The General Services Administration headquarters in DC are at the corner of 18th and F. We brainstormed, I don't know if anybody here has seen the Silicon Valley HBO show, but there was a great scene in season 1 where they're just brainstorming all the different names for their product. We totally did that. I had a whiteboard full of things, narrowed them down even more. We came up with about 4 that we sent off to the lawyers, and 18F was the only one that really didn't pose any problems. But it stuck, and I really like it.
I love that story so much, and I was really hoping it was like Area 51. There was something kind of, I don't know, little surreptitious, kind of dark about it. And there you are at the corner of 18th and F Street. It's really cool. All right, so let's talk about really digging in and getting some serious things done to develop or revise services. And Lisa, let's start with you because you're in an agency that touches everybody in the country, education, in some way, and you guys have done some very innovative things. Talk a little bit about what you've been up to.
Oh, absolutely. So my first project was something called College Scorecard.
College Scorecard.
College Scorecard. It released September 12th. And has been really successful. But the idea behind it, this was actually a presidential initiative in partnership with the Department of Education, and the premise was college education is the surest path to the middle class, right? Unemployment rates for people with high school diplomas only is something around 12%. If you have a college degree, a bachelor's, it is 3%. There are studies that show that over the course of your lifetime, if you have a degree from a 4-year institution, it is worth $1 million more to you over the course of your lifetime. So getting a college degree is super important, and yet the people who are kind of most in need of it, so low-income folks, first-generation college goers, people who are learning English, like they don't have access to great support systems, advisors. And so the question becomes, how do you actually get this kind of information, the information about what makes for a good school, what's going to give you the best value? How do you actually get that into their hands? And so that was the kind of tool that we were charged with building. I showed up, apparently there was a meeting with the president the week before I joined, and they were like, Lisa will fix that. And so that's what I ended up on the ground with.
So you pulled out your cape and there you went.
Right, exactly. But it was really, I mean, it was a fascinating experience, again, having come straight from private sector, and landing on the ground and understanding kind of the magnitude and how important this was and how this really could affect and shape the future of our country. Because as you talk about, if every person in the country had a bachelor's degree, like just imagine what it actually will do, what kind of impact it would have on our economy and our jobs. So it was the magnitude of the problem is really awesome. It was an interesting experience, right? So I got on the ground and I had to actually understand, one, how government worked, but more importantly, what this looks like and what we actually really needed to build, because nobody really had a clear definition of what it was going to look like. And so, we went around and we talked to all the stakeholders and we talked to folks who were creating policy and people who were looking at the data and the White House and all that stuff. But about 4 days into the project, I was like, how do students search for colleges? Like I started getting like hives. I was like, I must talk to some students. I have to talk to some students. And somebody on my team, and I'd been in DC for 4 days, and I was like, I don't know anybody here with any high school age students. Like, how do I find some? Somebody on my team was like, so we could go to the mall. And I was like, oh, that's genius. The mall where the kids hang out, where there's the stores. Except it turns out she was like, or the mall outside the building, the Washington Mall? That's what happens when you don't know DC. And it worked out.
Got to define your terms.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
it was also school field trip season, so that helped.
It was spring break. It was genius. We went and started accosting people as they came out of the Air and Space Museum, and we got people from Wisconsin and Nebraska and Minnesota. It was the brilliant idea. And from that, we also went to talk to a high school in Anacostia, a public school in DC. We talked to people who had written letters into the president. We talked to charter school folks in South Bronx. We talked to a high school in Iowa. So we gathered all this information and kind of figured out what it was that we needed to build and how we could actually get this information into hands of students so they actually know, if you're a low-income student, that actually what you're going to pay to go to college is not the sticker price. That in fact you might be better off going to a private school from a financial perspective than to a public school. To understand kind of how well a school is actually servicing the needs of its students, from like you can actually tell if a school's got a 15% graduation rate versus a 90% graduation rate. Looking at how much debt you actually might leave school with, and then also looking at the earnings that you're going to have after you've attended the schools, so that you can actually know that you'll be able to pay off any loans that you might have had to take off. So these were kind of the new data metrics that we were trying to get out there into the hands and really change the conversation, not just we wanted consumers to be able to get that information and then vote with their feet, right? So we wanted to change the discourse, change the conversation systemically. So the first thing that we actually built was was the College Scorecard, which is a consumer-facing tool. It was mobile first, and it does exactly kind of what we set out to do. It is an MVP, a minimally viable product, and it works really well, and we're really proud of it. More importantly, from my perspective, is what we did was we actually opened up the data. In fact, our password at some point was set the data free. And so we actually built...
Probably still our password.
No, now it's all completely in the open.
We'll have to change that now.
No, all completely in the open. And so we built an API, an application programming interface, that would enable other tools, other organizations that might be creating stuff for niche audiences, right? Not everybody's going to come to an ed.gov website. And so the idea is that if we could actually seed the data and get it out into the industry and actually have it start to become the standard, right? So right now, schools are prized for being exclusive, so not letting more people in. And is that the right metric that we actually want to value in our schools? And so actually getting the data that we think is important to look at in a school out to to the students wherever they might be, right? So at BET and media, you always say you want to get your content out to your audience wherever they are on whatever device at whatever time they're looking for it. And so that's exactly the idea behind creating an API and getting the data out. And so we actually built the consumer-facing tool on top of the API, which in technology is called dog fooding. We were the reference implementation on it, and I think we were one of the first organizations in government to actually use our own service to power our front-end website.
And how's that going?
It launched super successfully. We got 1 million users, I think, within the first week, it is so when we actually stood it up, so it wasn't just the consumer tool, but when we actually stood it up, we had also there were 7 people who stood up with us at launch who actually incorporated the data into their own tools.
1 million and change unique users in the first week, and that was against the year before. There was a previous version of the college scorecard. This is not the first time this has been tried. In the previous year, the old version did 168,000 unique users, which is a number I'll never forget because I got asked that question in that meeting with the president, by the president in that meeting that Lisa was talking about a second ago, and I didn't know. So I went and looked it up. If I could.
So how does the president react when you say, I'm not sure?
He moves on. I figured it was better than lying. If I could put I know Hillary wants to say something. If I could add a little behind the scenes commentary to Lisa's story there, she talked about how we did talk to users, did user-centric design, made even policy decisions about what data we were going to release, which was incredibly touchy, by the way. This was the end of 3 years earlier that the administration had announced its intention to do something like a college scorecard. And the very idea was incredibly controversial. The higher education community has feelings about this. Their revenue depends on federal students. It was a messy policy issue by the time we got involved. And in that meeting that Lisa's talking about, it was April 1st, was that one I remember. We heard from the president, we heard from the vice president, we heard from Secretary Duncan, was the ed secretary at the time. All of them had impassioned views on it, and the president made clear what he wanted to get done. And I was there, and after that, and put in my 2 cents, except for the part where I didn't know the answer. After that was over, we had some really frank conversations with the policy decision makers and said, we can help you do this. We can make a web site thing, whatever it is that you want. We can do that on the timetable you're talking about, but we are going to have to have a lot of say over the product decisions because it's not going to be possible to do your typical government Christmas tree waterfall plan with everybody hanging their pet project as an ornament on it somewhere. That can't happen in 6 months. And given that we were up against the clock, people agreed to a lot of terms and conditions that they wouldn't oftentimes agree to. After that, we were out on a limb and had to actually deliver it. And we made that promise, as Lisa says, about a week before Lisa started, and she came in on her first day. I was like, so here's what you got. You got about this much time to get it done. So we had we sweated it to the end and had some, it was a stressful launch thing, but once that thing was actually released, it got very positive reviews.
That's great.
And the agency is not accustomed to that happening. That's
true.
It's true.
That's fun.
But I just want to. So part of it is. It was really successful and it got a lot of great reviews and the data got out. There's all kinds of tools. There's Spanish language tools now. There's tools that are specifically directed towards low-income students that actually do side-by-side comparison that put values on schools. It's really tremendous. And there's still much more work to be done. Right. Part of what we're doing is imbuing this culture of continuous iteration. So that continues to live on. But I think one of the incredible things, and this is kind of why the partnership works so well and how government can be effective, is, I started April, we launched September 12th, but development actually started on the project in the middle of June. So the development of this project, APIs, front end, all of that stuff went from the middle of June to the middle of September. So in 3 months, and not for nothing, even private sector, that would be pretty fantastic. And this is what I want to talk about a little bit, which is this is the partnership of US Digital Service in coordination with 18F. So we actually partnered on this project together to bring it all to fruition and make it happen. And we wouldn't have been able to do it if it weren't for the services and the platforms that 18F had already started building out and that we were actually able to just kind of plug into. So I don't know where you were going, but I wanted to, that's how we all were able to get it done.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. This is a great project to talk about just for a couple of reasons. One is that partnership. The Department of Education needed to get this done. 18F was able to essentially do an agreement with them to put a development team together and to leverage the services, the infrastructure that we had already built. So 18F playing that support structure for the rest of the other two layers comes into play. The other one is just to talk a little bit about how we work and to really talk a little bit about what's different and why it's different now.
Good.
And 18F has done this a couple of times, but it also happened to a certain extent with this project, which is, and our stakeholders have never been as important as the president, but essentially, as Mikey said, this has been something that's been on the docket for about 3 years. And the original vision was that the president wanted a ranking, 1 to whatever, 100, and that kind of iterated and changed, and it was really due to this team being saying, "That's great, Mr. President, and we should talk to high school kids and their parents and their guidance counselors and figure out what they need. Do they want a ranking, or do they want to be able to search and compare and contrast, and what data are they really searching for to make this decision?"
And was he cool with that? Was he open to that when you said?
I was not in those meetings.
Well, so this goes back to what Mikey brokered before I joined, which was we were going to have unprecedented kind of say. And yeah, we did the thing that was important that we focused on was doing the right thing for the audience. And so we took into account what was important for policy, what was important for data, what was important for why. We took all that stuff into account, and then we put the user first.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah. There are two other not universally needed necessarily projects you've been working on, but big, gnarly areas with big policy implications behind them. One is the Veterans Administration, and the second is immigration and the whole green card system. And you guys have taken both of those on. Somebody described those as really big hairballs when we were in Washington meeting with you guys. Can you talk a little bit about those? Because those are even more, in some ways, significant.
I wish it was still only those two, by the way. That was when we talked last July or so. You can add a few other agencies to the list now. So VA and DHS want me to do it?
Go for it.
So VA, problem statement in a nutshell, we are creating disabled veterans at a pace that we can't absorb in the rest of the system. We've been doing that for 10, 12 years or so, owing to a certain series of foreign policy decisions. You can probably guess what they are. And it's been overwhelming the rest of the system since then. And the backlog of disability claims at one point was 600,000 or so. That high watermark was hit around March 2014, if I remember correctly, about just a few months before we came on the scene. Delayed disability claims in the case of the VA very often mean a lapse in treatment, which could be physical therapy for a new amputee, because we create a large number of people with that problem. Hearing loss is incredibly common, and mental health issues are incredibly common. Untreated post-traumatic stress and untreated depression is not only a life-threatening situation for the veteran, it is for a lot of people around the veteran as well. So this is, if you follow this part of the news, this was a lot of it for those years, 2014, 2015 or so. Our job there was to try to make the processing of those disability claims more efficient, and also the appeals to those disability claims more efficient that we're also working on. We also need to get better at exchanging, doing the handoff between the Department of Defense when you separate from active duty and you're handed over to the VA as a customer. there's a seam there where your medical records are supposed to leave the DoD system and be picked up by the VA's own hospital network. That calls for something that sounds like an interoperable, ideally electronic medical record. That was largely done and is still largely done. That mandate, the mandate for interoperable electronic medical records, is several years old, and it was met so far by the DoD taking their approximately one file box average paper records per veteran, hiring a contractor to scan them, and sending that as a PDF to the VA as an image PDF. It's still mostly that way, by the way. We have made it somewhat better, but there's still a long way to go on interoperable medical records. That is, like I said, the nutshell version of what there is to do at the VA, and we are in the middle of it.
There was someone else from Google working on that, right? Matthew Weaver?
Yes.
Is Matthew here tonight?
I think he had to go to San Francisco.
Matthew is somebody, they get to pick their own job titles, kind of like a Silicon Valley tradition, and
Mikey didn't pick administrator, I promise.
maybe I don't know if he picked it or not, but anyway, Matthew's handle within the VA is Rogue Leader.
Yeah.
If you're a Star Wars fan, you'll get the implication.
Did get to pick what we wrote on our business cards because we had to pay for that ourselves anyways.
Sorry,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, he's here. So he's been a big part of that VA effort. You brought up immigration. The short version of that is the process by which you enter the United States on either what's called an immigrant visa or a non-immigrant visa. Either way, but particularly for those that are trying to immigrate and become American citizens, process is incredibly difficult. It involves interacting with a lot of different bureaus of the U.S. government, all of whom act as if they've never heard of each other before when you interact with them. You get something from one place and you physically carry it yourself to the next government office where you give it to them. Sometimes you have to carry a package of paper in a sealed bag that you're not allowed to open, and you take it with you to like the border crossing, stuff like that. You have to pay fees at a half dozen different places throughout this process. Each of those fees will be a different amount that's hard to figure out in advance. You'll interact with a different payment system to do it. So you might be able to use a credit card or you might not, and you'll have to create a new login password each time. All of these things are true about the immigration process. Now, we came along and attached ourselves to the side of an existing initiative at the agency called U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. It has been there for years and been working on this problem, and we kind of picked up and accelerated some pieces of it. We did successfully put online in a new form, in a new actual human design form, what's called the I-90 process, which is the way you get a replacement green card if you're a permanent resident in the United States and you lose yours. If you are a green card holder and you lose it, this is your piece of paper, this is your piece of documentation that gives you the right to work in the United States as well as not be deported from the United States. So losing it and being without it is a stressful condition to be in. It used to be 6 to 9 months if you were lucky after you mailed in the paper form when you got your replacement back. It's on the order of, I don't want to promise precisely because I forget, but it's on the order of a few weeks now after the launch of the new thing. And we started with that because it is a relatively simple process as these things go. It's only a couple of forms and a couple of fees, but it's a really high volume one that affects a lot of people. There's high hundreds of thousands, I think 700,000-800,000 transactions a year of that. So quickly, that is the VA and the USCIS.
Those are two pretty amazing things. Haley.
And the immigration one is a really fascinating example for a couple of reasons. One is that we like to say there's no such thing as a new idea in government, because if you've thought of it, someone's already thought of it way, way, way before then. And lo and behold, the idea of digitizing the immigration system was not a new idea. It had been actually tried more than a decade before and had been underway for a very, very long time. We won't go through the number of billions, yes, I said billions with a B, that had been spent on trying to digitize the immigration system before then.
Yeah, about 2.
Yeah. As a taxpayer, it hurts my soul. But the point is, this process had been underway for over a decade. And it was less than a few weeks, about 3 months, I think, actually, from when we were able to drop in a very, very tiny team. It was less than 5 people. And from when they showed up to when we were actually able to get the first form out the door. And what's fascinating about that piece is what that means is the folks who were on the ground already working on this inside the agency were also the people who fixed it. Which shows, I think, part of the big strategy we're working against here is that it doesn't, you can actually change the context and the environment and have dramatically different results without a huge amount of lift. You have to poke in the strategically place all of the right pressures on the system, and it can actually start shifting faster than you'd think, which is sort of why I love the immigration example so much.
You know, for decades we've been hearing presidential candidates and other politicians use this phrase, waste, fraud, and abuse. And for the life of me, I've wondered for the longest time what that would actually look like if it ever got uncovered. And I certainly don't want to be one to suggest that fraud or abuse is going on here at all, but the stories that you've been talking about for the last, I'll let that go unremarked, but the stories that you've been telling for the last hour or so are certainly stories in this day and age, in 2016, of waste, not for any intentional purposes or anything else. It's just simply it's not functioning with the times.
Sure.
Yeah.
Haley got at it a second ago in the beginning there. We have, and back to your very first question, which was a hard one I had to think about, what is the problem? Well, but a big part of it is the normalization of failure, by which I mean we have arrived at a state where the status quo way of doing something, which is put out for an RFP, wait for 3 or 4 months, look at the bids that come back, go through the procurement process, do your source selection, do all that stuff, hire a huge government, hire a business who does almost all of its business with the government to do the waterfall plan that you're used to, spend 7 years and a couple $2 billion, because this is a fact about the government. It is easier to spend a couple $2 billion than it is to spend $1 million and hire a few people. Because that is absolutely true. All of us have dealt with it. So all of these things, this is almost guaranteed not to succeed. There is a Standish Group study that we cite a lot that says that 94% of government IT efforts come significantly over budget or behind schedule or deficient in functionality or all three of those things. That isn't the outcome 94% of the time.
Wow.
But it's
and 40% of them never actually see the light of day or ship functioning.
Anything, like never seen by a user, ever. Totally unsurprising outcomes. So this happens all the time, but when I say the normalization of that, what I mean is nothing bad will happen to any of the people that were involved in the contracting decisions that made that, which makes it the safest thing for them to do. So like when we say that it is, like Haley said, that is the riskiest way to do a project, it is in the sense of the project's not going to succeed, but it is the least risky from the perspective of the people in the government who are responding to a different set of incentives, because nothing, like if the project doesn't work, nothing will happen to you. What will get you in trouble is if you try something new and dangerous. If that goes anything less than smashingly well, then there will be a lot of attention on you. And then all of the oversight and all of the accountability mechanisms of government, which is Congress will conduct investigations, GAO, which is the Government Accountability Office, the Congress's investigative arm, will conduct investigations. Your internal inspector general will, it'll just be all bad. So if we only did one thing, we mostly talk about how, this is again a thing that has shifted over the last year. Like it seemed a year ago that the real special sauce we were bringing into the government was these new ways of approaching technology problems and new practices and new this and new that, and we're all super fancy and shiny. And that's true, but probably an even more important ingredient in the special recipe is we are a way to outsource that risk from the perspective of the agency. We are term limited appointments. We are not, nobody on the stage has in mind my own career security as forefront. And it's hopeless, by the way. Like it is a misunderstanding, and it's a failure to understand to blame the government employees for putting their career stability first. Like everybody puts their career stability first everywhere in the whole, or their own, taking care of themselves and their family is the most important thing to most people working every job anywhere. And so
But I would say
ability for us to be there as somebody who's not going to be here 5 years from now, and honestly having somebody else to blame, that is a huge value add.
But I would say it's more than kind of career stability, I would say. I think you touched on it with like the incentivizations for what success looks like is just different. And so I don't necessarily know that it's about, oh my God, I need to make sure that I have a job in a year and 10 years. I think that the definition of what win is and what I've done my job well is maybe not well aligned with taking some of what they perceive as risk. But again, we know that risk is actually continuing to do the status quo.
Well, and it's this whole thing that the statistic Mike, you mentioned earlier about if the status quo is 94% of all projects come in late, over budget, behind schedule, 40% never even see the light of day, that's a norm, right?
Yep.
Everyone is just working to the norm, and
Yep.
that's part of what you guys are trying to change. I want to talk for a minute. We got such great questions from the audience, and I want to get to those. There are two other subjects I want to talk about quickly before I do, though. You're doing this with a relatively small team. There are 113 members of the U.S. Digital Service. They fanned out across almost every agency in government, maybe more. There are only 185 people within 18F, which in Washington terms is you could fit them on the head of a pin. I want to talk about the kind of person that it takes to be on this team and to do what you do. It surely can't be a good thing to walk in and say, I'm from Silicon Valley, get out of the way, I'm going to show you how to do things around here. So what kind of person is successful on your teams?
You raise a fantastic point, which is we are looking for, and actually we're not even looking for, they tend to find us, an incredible combination of skill sets, which is not that anyone on our team can be the most technically competent in the room at any given moment, but also have such deep EQ and ability to communicate well that they can also win over the hearts and minds of the room. We actually just have our first full year about a day or two ago, where we had our online application available on the internet. We launched it at State of the Union last year. And so we now have our first full year of data. And in that year, we've had almost over 4,500 people apply. And to give you a little bit of context, it turns out our acceptance rate is actually way more competitive than Harvard's, because we are really looking for the best of the best. And I cannot tell you how incredibly thrilled I am to work with such a talented team, because the people at the United States Digital Service are phenomenal. And we have this really interesting collection of thought leaders from across the industry, everything from people like Mikey, who helped set up the elite SRE class of engineers inside Google, to founding members of Amazon, to people who took Twitter's infrastructure from the fail whale days to what it is now. And it's this incredible collection of the smartest, most genuinely incredible people I could have ever imagined working with. And they're inside the government, which is the mind-blowing part. And I think that's the differentiating factor between the folks on our team and any other team, which is that they're coming in to do this not because they get to put the White House on their business card or because they make tons of money, because everyone knows they're usually taking a pay cut to come into government, though they're not too shabby of salaries. And if you look across the United States, they're coming because they actually want to make a difference in the lives of Americans, and they actually want to work on things that matter. And so those are the type of people we're looking for. But like I said in the beginning, they tend to find us because if you are looking to have an impact, if you are an impact junkie, there is no better place to be working than right now in the United States federal government.
Haley mentioned the term EQ, and we're really looking for the people that can have empathy. They can have empathy with the people that they're building the services for. They can have empathy with the people across the table from them, to win the hearts and minds, as Haley said. But 18F, and I'm sure USDS is the same, we really screen for that sense of mission-driven, impact-driven person. That absolutely, we're screening for a certain skill set and a certain level of skill. But really, almost more than anything, is that EQ side of it. Is are you here for the quote unquote right reason? Because if you're not, once you hit that first bureaucratic wall, you're not going to want to hop over it. You're not going to know what to do. You have to be willing to bash your head against that wall, figure out your way around it, and keep going.
And I would just add on that as, again, somebody who's come straight from private sector, just as an example of this, which is in terms of the scale of the impact and what it means. So I worked on something called Shockwave, which was a little while ago, but was basically the advent of animation on the web. Right before Shockwave, the web was static text and graphics; it didn't move. And then I helped launch Hulu. I worked at BET Digital. Right, so my code and my products have shipped to literally hundreds of millions of people. And I've had an opportunity, I've been really fortunate to be able to actually kind of affect the way people consume media in pretty significant ways. Nothing compares to what I'm doing now. Like the ability to, if I could even just affect one person's life in terms of trying to help them go to college and make a better life for themselves, this would be worth it. And I'm getting the opportunity to actually affect millions of people's lives and have a real significant impact in meaningful ways. And it's just the scale is enormous and completely different from anything that I've ever done in private sector.
I'll do it and I'll be quick. I would say you got to be pretty good at whatever is your particular field of expertise. You got to be reasonably confident in yourself in that field of expertise, because you'll be in a lot of rooms where you'll be the only one who has done an agile sprint before, and you'll need to explain how it is done, and you'll need to be convincing when you do that. A lot of the time you'll need to be very patient and very resilient, and ready to be okay with it when you let other people take credit for the stuff that you have done. If you're all that stuff, then you're ideal for us. I'll throw in one. So Haley mentioned we're very selective. That is true. I would remind everybody who's listening, though, that there is no correlation between how good people are at what they do and how good they think they are at what they do. So please don't hear that and think, oh, this is not for me. This is for like some elite engineer somewhere else. You may be exactly that person, whether you think you are or not.
That's fantastic. One other question, then we're going to go to the audience questions. Some ideas that come from this president are not always the most popular in Washington, especially with the people on the other side of the aisle. And so the natural question is, especially since he's had such a high profile in leading the effort, how's this being received in Washington? Is it bipartisan? What sort of support is it starting to get now? Haley, why don't we start with you?
This is one of my favorite parts about the United States Digital Service, is that in the midst of all of the political rhetoric we hear about DC being so at each other's throats and the two parties not working together, USDS actually has managed to thread straight through both sides of the aisle. And is actually, I think, one of the most fantastic examples of a bipartisan agenda that we can see today in Washington. It's this incredible thing that's happening where in the process of actually delivering digital services that work better for people and making it easier to get the care and the access to people who need it, we are also conveniently saving tons of taxpayer dollars and making government more efficient and effective at the same time, which is quite honestly both parts of what can be stereotypically generalized as different sides of the aisle, though I don't really know if I agree with that assumption. But we, as a result, are getting tons of support all over DC, whether it's from the Hill or the agencies or the White House. And one of the recent developments that we're very excited about was just a couple weeks ago, Congress came out with our FY16 budget, which is a lot of insider baseball, but the point of it is that we received almost our entire funding request from a predominantly Republican Hill, which we see as a very, very strong bipartisan endorsement of the work that we're doing. And if you actually line up how we select our projects, we have a criteria that's mostly focused on How many users are going to benefit from the service? And is it truly providing a life-changing, impactful service? But also, and what is the failure waste? Like, what is the opportunity cost of not doing things differently? And if you line up our list and the president's and the GAO, which is the kind of internal auditors for government, the Government Accountability Office, which are independent and also work closely with the Hill, they're all almost exactly the same. Because it turns out the biggest problems that need to be solved everyone agrees with, because no one thinks that veterans should be waiting longer to get access to their benefits. No one thinks that government should be wasting taxpayer dollars on things that could be much less expensive and work much more simply. So it's a really incredible kind of coming together of both sides of DC.
That budget thing is super surprising, by the way.
Very surprising.
It is inside baseball, so we won't tell you the half-hour version of it, I promise. But people who do follow these things very closely were dumbfounded, because like not only were we funded, like not only are we a project that the president is very personally invested in that was asking Congress for money, asking this Congress for money, but like our appropriation lands right inside the White House, and if there's one thing that this Congress doesn't want to add more money to, if there's a few of them, but the White House is high on the list anyway. So this was a very surprising outcome. And Haley and some other people helped. Obviously, I was new and didn't know what I was doing, and still don't. And we go and talk to the appropriations committees, and we bring our PowerPoint slides, and we make our sales pitch, and we say, this is what we're here to do, and please give us money. And they're very kind of stone-faced and don't give you much of a reaction. And then we find out when the spending bill comes out, just like everybody else does. We don't get any special insider access to that legislative process. So it was a very surprising outcome.
So this is a good segue into the first audience question, which is, given that this is the president's last year, what are the goals for 2016? Can you talk about those? Hillary, you want to go for it, or?
Well, from 18F, which is separate from the administration, separate from the White House.
Right.
But for us, two big goals this year are to expand some of our consulting services so that we can help with the agency embedded teams that the USDS is getting into the agencies, and that we can help like sort of go in and be a startup team for certain agencies. So we're expanding on that business line. We're also running some more experiments around the acquisition space. So I mentioned the marketplaces and the blanket purchase agreement that we set up. One of the big things we're experimenting right now is what we're calling micro purchases. Essentially, it's very easy to purchase something on a credit card in the government, but you have a spending limit of up to $3,500. So what we're doing is we built a platform. It's an auction platform, sort of, where we're holding our own bug bounties, if you will. You know, if you're a developer and you have ever participated in something like that, we're sort of doing that. So we've got all of our code is open source. We develop completely in the open. It's all on GitHub, and then we pick tasks. We pick issues that have been, written for certain projects, and we say, okay, we're gonna put this one up for auction. And it's been interesting because we've done it twice now. We've done sort of two different task batches. The first time, the task got bid down to $1. And it was really, the person was trying to make this statement like, I'm an open source developer. I would have done this for free, but here, pay me $1. The second time, we sort of tried to solve for that a little bit, because obviously we want to be spurring business. We want to be, participating in that community and good for the community. So we made a few tweaks. We didn't say you couldn't bid $1, but it turns out that didn't happen this time. But another interesting plot twist was that I think all of the final bids were between about $250 and about $350 at the end of the day. For some was one task ended up being about 18 line of codes, which the guy shipped within 24 hours from the time the auction closed. So we're really able to kind of change the game of how services can be delivered and how we can scale our efforts. But the plot twist was actually that somebody, again, it wasn't $1, but somebody went in and actually fixed the thing that we had put out to auction before the auction was over.
Good job.
So.
And what about USDS? What are you guys trying to get done this year?
It wasn't quite the way you phrased the question, but it's obvious enough. Turns out there's a presidential election this year. It is almost a guarantee, I know some of you heard me say this at lunch, but I know there is almost a guarantee that the next president and the next person in my job will not spend as much time together. Unless and until the next administration has their own healthcare.gov and this becomes front and center in the agenda again, which could happen, but let's assume it doesn't. So we've got to figure out how to, if we assume for the moment that what we're doing is something that's worth preserving, we've got to figure out how to create enough of our own reputation and our own relationships with the rest of with agencies and with all of the layers of people that are still going to be there in 2017 that we continue on into the next term. And this is the institutionalization conversation, which started months ago inside with us and will go all the way through the end. That word can mean a lot of different things to people in Washington. The place where what we are betting on is just flat out delivering enough stuff that's of enough value that we are worth continuing. Like, I don't actually mind. This is frequently criticized as a big weakness of our model, is we depend on an appropriation every year from Congress. If they didn't want to fund it next year, they don't have to. And if they didn't want to fund it the year after that, they don't have to. Likewise, we depend on the executive power from the top of the agencies. It's a top-down support. And that means that if we don't continually earn the right to continue to exist, then we won't continue to exist. And I'm at peace with that, but it's a thing that causes people a certain amount of stress. So what we're trying to do in 2016, in order to make us worth continuing, we need to ship some more stuff at the VA. I talked a little bit about the appeals process that we're working on right now. We are on the hook to produce a new system for doing Social Security disability claims adjudication, not unlike the process at the VA. The immigration stuff that you talked about, that's ongoing. We have to improve the refugee admission process. And a new one I mentioned, I wish it was still only 2. A new one of the newest things we're on to is, if you follow really closely the White House talk about the executive actions on improving criminal background checks before you can buy a gun, we've been directed to work with the FBI to modernize that system as well. So those are all things that we need to show real results on this year.
And one additional thing on top of what Mikey said is, yes, there are a lot of unknowns in 2017 and in the near future. But one thing that is exceedingly clear and that everybody in this room knows is technology is not going to become any less important to government than it is today. It's only going to become more and more important. And I think one of the incredible transformations that's happening right now is it's exceedingly clear that, you know, as president or CEO of this country, yes, you need to have a background in policy. Ideally, it's great if you have a background in law and economics. But there's another leg of the stool now, and that's tech. Just like you can't run a company in the private sector without understanding tech yourself, or at least empowering a CTO, you can't do the same thing with a country anymore, whether it's the United States or elsewhere in the world. And that trend is not going to change. That's for sure.
I have a question for you.
Okay,
Actually.
not about what I'm doing in 2016.
Not about 2016.
Okay.
But it's an important question. Someone wrote tonight, this was the first time they'd heard of College Scorecard. And so what are you doing to get the word out there to everybody who wants to hear? I mean, clearly if 1 million people have created user accounts, that's something, but there are a lot more people who could potentially benefit.
Oh, absolutely. And I will also say that there's the target audience is, again, kind of underserved communities. I will also say we talked a lot about high school students, but actually 50% of the students in college today in this country are over 24 years old. And so it is really, really important. So we built this minimally viable product, and I'm glad, but this actually falls into what we're doing in 2016. Yeah. Just one little piece of what we're doing in 2016, which is actually, again, kind of building, iterating, and building this culture of continuous improvement. And part of that includes outreach, and part of that actually is trying to figure out how to get the message out there, how to actually do outreach to guidance counselors who actually are reaching those students. How do we actually continue partnering with third-party organizations who are in those communities, and how do we actually get them, entice them to use the data? So there's a lot more, right? We did what I would call a 1.0, but we will continue to iterate, and actually both from a future perspective, but more importantly also from an outreach perspective. So that will actually continue on.
And part of the beauty of the College scorecard is you actually don't need to have heard of it or gone to a .gov website to benefit as a student from opening up the data that Lisa and her team did. And that's sort of the whole point, right? Is that this data is now getting put to or pushed into where users currently are, which is on different education websites. Because honestly, not every person thinks of going to a .gov to get help for things like this. And we want to make that okay and push this information and data where people currently are instead of forcing them to come to us.
So 2 more questions from the audience, and then I've got one final question. This is, what about, I'll just read this. What about pushback from the hundreds of thousands of contractors engaged in developing software the old way? You are so few in number, and they are making a lot of money.
Those are facts.
Those are facts. You know, as I mentioned, we are very much trying to work with the vendor community and enable and empower businesses and small businesses to do work with the government. That's part of what the General Services Administration does. And so we are taking on that mantle on the technology side of things. And all of the things that we're doing are really in service of that. All of the acquisition stuff I've mentioned, all of the marketplaces, trying to get new businesses in and doing business with the government for the first time. Are the bug bounties. You have to be registered in this thing called sam.gov. You have to be a registered business owner. But these people are doing business with the government for the first time, and it's giving them sort of a lens and a window into this new experience. So yes, there are absolutely companies all over the country and specifically in DC trying to do business with the government and making a lot of money at it. But I think what we're doing, and you've heard us all say it in various ways, but we're shipping code and we're shipping software, but at the end of the day, we are shipping culture. We are trying to fundamentally change the way that these things can get done, so it can be faster, it can be better, it can be cheaper. You can have all three, you don't have to pick two, which is the old adage. And when you show that that can be done with a lean, mean group of people inside the government, and you also show good faith that you want, that we understand there's fewer than 300 people doing this. Like, it's an $80 billion, at least, an $80 billion industry to do business, to do IT business with the government. We are, you can't even see the dot that we are in that, in that number. So we know we can't do it ourselves. We have to be able to rely on the business community, have to be able to rely on the other vendors out there. So what we can do is to give the people we're working with a new experience so that they go through a design studio for the first time. They go through an agile, iterative software development cycle for the first time. And they come to expect that from the next people they work with. And hopefully they look for those qualities in the next people they work with so that the whole system starts to gradually change.
That's a great answer. Go ahead, Mikey.
We have talked this one through a few times. And all of us have slightly different take on what the strategy actually is, and that's fine because everybody has their own ideas. But first point I would make is we don't have to change every project in the whole entire government. We don't have to hit all of that $84 billion a year in IT spending for this to be a thing that's worth doing. The 5 or 10 important projects, of which I described a couple for different questions tonight, if we only ever affected those, I would feel like what we did was worth doing. That's point one. And point two is, yes, there is this ginormous industry which is going to continue, which is going to be mostly contractor driven, because to bring all that work inside the federal government would be a staggering expansion. Hundreds of thousands of more federal employees. You couldn't, an agency, it would take an agency bigger than the VA, which is the biggest agency in terms of employees, to take this all inside the federal government. And we don't intend for that to happen. We're not making any effort to make that happen. I feel like I say this in every event like this, and it never gets printed in the press, it never gets picked up, and it never gets amplified. But we're not here to kill that industry. I don't care. That industry can continue to exist. That's great. That's fine. We're going to have to, I don't care if those same exact companies exist. We just need to fix the ecosystem a little bit so that competition is a little bit more healthy. So that we can still spend, the government is, this is one thing I will predict with 100% confidence, the government is going to continue to spend a shitload of money. doing stuff.
Turns out we're
That's, by the way, why it never gets quoted.
Right. Damn it. I knew there was a reason. So that's going to continue to happen. And people will still make a lot of money, and making a lot of money is not a priori, is not, on the face of it, a bad thing. But we do need to, it would be an improvement if either we continued to spend exactly the amount we do right now, but the things actually worked when we were done. Like if we didn't have that 40% that never saw the light of day, if everything we bought actually worked, that would be an improvement even if we didn't save a dime. And if we didn't ever get anything to work any better, but we saved a lot of money, that would also be an improvement.
Right.
We absolutely don't want to villainize contractors. We couldn't do this without them. But here's the hypothesis. They don't want to build shitty digital services either. They don't want to work this way either. And that's kind of the hypothesis we're working off of.
Yeah,
We can change the environment. They will actually love to work with us the way that they're used to working with their private sector clients. I think our government is actually propping up a failing industry. I don't know who else does waterfall except for us now. And I'm sure the large contracting companies of the world don't appreciate having to have a waterfall shop operating still.
No, they do what we hire them to do.
Yeah.
So if we get smarter about directing them, they'll adapt.
Yeah.
They submitted bids to Hillary's talking about some of the new kind of experimental stuff we're doing with making the competition more competitive, and they will adapt.
Yeah.
But it's up to us to set the direction because we write the paychecks and we write the RFPs and we write the contracts.
Last audience question is about whether there is a role for non-developers in all of this. Are you looking for people who've run businesses or who do biz dev or who have more kind of entrepreneurial business skills but not necessarily tech skills? I see you shaking your head, Haley.
Yes, absolutely. We need an incredibly diverse range of skill sets because this work is incredibly hard. We need the best engineers in the country, as well as the best project managers and designers and user researchers and policy experts and people who are generally good at getting shit done in hard environments. Because I guarantee you, there is probably no less hospitable of an environment than the government to getting stuff done. So if your skill set happens to also be bureaucracy hacking, please apply.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
I'm going to ask the final question and make it just a little bit personal. You've talked about your shipping culture, not just simply services. And shipping culture and having a culture affect you is kind of a two-way street. And so I want to ask you, kind of as a final thought, maybe starting with you, Haley, and working this way, how have you changed? How has this experience changed you? And what do you think you'll take away from this when you look back on it?
I think, to be honest, the ways in which this has changed me will be for the rest of my life, and I probably still haven't learned all of the ways yet. My biggest fear is that I will never be as satisfied working on a project again because the impact of the federal government is so large and so meaningful in people's lives that I will probably, don't know it yet, but will probably spend the rest of my life on a quest trying to find something that impactful once I leave here.
For me, and again, I've only been there 8 months, and having worked at a large corporation and several large corporations before, the way government works and the bureaucracy hacking that's needed and how to actually get stuff done is not completely foreign to me. The thing that I have learned and that has kind of struck me the most is I knew when I was joining that my team members within the Digital Coalition at US Digital Service were going to be super passionate and engaged and excited about what we were doing. What I didn't know as an outsider about government is that when I showed up at the agency, I was blown away by the folks who I'm partnered with there, who show up every day, get out of bed, and put one foot in front of the other because all they want to do is make the world a better place and make it better for students and make education easier to get and more equal across this country. And I kind of expected all this resistance and this, you hear about, right from the outside, you hear about like how bad government is and how hard it is to get anything done and nobody wants to and they're all just a bunch of bureaucrats. And then you're on the ground and all anybody who's there wants to do is actually fix things. And that, that's a great learning experience for me.
plus one, plus two. And I think for me, you sort of centered the question around culture, and to me that has been what has resonated most. I was a designer, really building web services in the private sector, and then mostly around and for government, as I mentioned, from the outside, and always kind of from the design side. Was doing marketing and sales at the end of my stint until I got to the government. But have kind of been preaching user-centered design for a very long time. Focus on the user. Think about user needs before stakeholder needs. And the thing that has sort of stuck with me, because my job really almost from the beginning has not necessarily been delivering product, but has been building this team. It has been delivering the team. And it is incredible to me what you can do when you put your focus on people and on culture. And the number of people that when you ask them what's the best thing about 18F, across the board, the first thing out of their mouth is the people. And like I said, when you screen for that, when you put a focus on it, when you put a focus on people, on diversity, on really wanting to hear from everybody, it is really incredible what that team can do. And that's going to change how I approach everything from now on.
Mikey.
I had the most time to prepare.
And you just took a big sip of water, too. So.
And yet, I feel like I'm totally unready to answer this question. I will acknowledge first, because I feel like it's important on behalf of all people that work for us to acknowledge that, yes, none of our lives are ever going to be the same. A good number of people are going to come and have come and done a limited time tour of duty, just like we sold them in the video that was up there, and have gone back to something resembling normalcy for what they were used to. I most likely am not. I can see that. I have no idea what's going to become of any of us. We talk about this. It's not because we're just on stage in front of 500 people. It's not any different when we're at lunch. We have no idea what's going to become of us in a year or so. The human cost of doing this is high. The sacrifices that people make to do this kind of work is high. I could go into that in some depth too, but I won't to spare you. I've become very, very aware of that because particularly the specific job that I do, which involves being a backstop to a lot of those people who come to work in the government and turns out to be tougher. We mentioned Weaver a minute ago. He has a kind of speech that he loves to do about there is no possible informed consent here because it doesn't matter. This is literally what happens when we recruit, when I talk to people one-on-one just before they come and say, I'm going to tell you how hard it's going to be and you're going to not believe me. And even if you do, you're going to imagine the hardest thing that you can imagine, and it's still going to be harder than that after you get here. So a couple weeks after you get here, you're going to have some really hard moments, and we're going to work through those, and that's what I do. So so since your question was, how has this changed you? My frame of reference has changed a lot to where a year ago, if you said, how are you going to fix the government? I would talk about agile design process and, I don't know, Ruby and whatever else we're going to use is going to be great. Technology-focused stuff. I don't think about that hardly at all anymore. What I think about is just the problems of managing enormous organizations of people where communication becomes really difficult and coordination becomes really difficult, and it's not sufficient that they all want to get something really good done. They do all believe in their way that they want to make service better for veterans, as Lisa said. So that's one of the things you've got to come to terms with really fast. That's one of the things that makes those first couple weeks really hard, because you meet all these people and you realize they all want the same thing you do, and so why is this so hard? And it is still very hard. We're building this organization ourselves. We're a couple hundred people now, which is enough to have our own organizational dynamics. I'm having to face the fact that we're not magically different from the people that are working in the government. We're not magically, all of the same incentives that lead it to be difficult to run a group and reach consensus, those apply to us too. So it's likely that whatever I go to do after this, which I don't have any idea what it is, it'll probably be thinking about those kinds of problems mostly.
Can I add one thing?
Sure.
The other thing, especially kind of as you guys were talking about it, that strikes me is this has also been a tremendous opportunity to have a platform to have a platform actually that talk about building diverse teams. And I think that we have taken on ownership of actually trying to build that out and to actually prove that it's possible and to actually be representative of the people that we're trying to serve. But more importantly, we understand and know that we develop better products. We actually will ship better things if we actually have a diversity of opinion and voices. And that's been a really important thing that I think that we've really tried to showcase. And I think especially as you talk about in the tech industry and as we talk about the elite folks that we are trying to recruit. And the more we can actually showcase that this is possible, that it's possible to build a team like this, and that in fact it is a better team because of its diversity, that I think that that's an important takeaway from it as well. Absolutely.
Well, I feel like we've discovered something rare and wonderful tonight, both in the work that you're doing and in you as individuals. So thank you for spending time with us and being revolutionaries tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.